Oh, yeah, that actually is a great idea. Like, waiting on them. Good. Brian, you good?
Yeah.
Good. Lindsay, you good? Yep. All right, we are back out of executive session. At this time, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Will, it's your last meeting. We don't have any other students here. I think we need you to lead us, brother. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Will. We will be moving straight into presentations. Dr. Marshausen.
Mark, at this point, I would like to introduce Mark Bobo from the Ohio School Boards Association to make a very special presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Marshausen. Good evening, Board of Education, the Membership Engagement Consultant for the Ohio School Board Association. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Anytime I come to a school board meeting, I'm always reminded of, oh, all right.
There you go. Use this one here.
All right. Is this better? All right. I'll start over. Good evening. Mark Bobo with the Ohio School Board Association. Thank you all for allowing me to be here tonight. Always, when I'm able to come to a board meeting, it's always a pleasure to see. To be very honest with you, I love each of our board members, but when I see students present, it brings joy to my heart. I'm a former high school administrator, and to see students engaged with everything that has to do with our public education, I just really appreciate them being here tonight. But I've come tonight to honor Mr. Christopher Valentine for 20 years of board service. As each of you know, board members, when they decide to run for the school board and serve in this capacity, it's a labor of love and commitment to your community. And no doubt, if you've done it for more than one term, you must love something about your public education in your community. And so tonight, I'm privileged to honor Mr. Valentine for his 20 years of service. I want you to know there's not many people in this state that serve for this long. So for someone to decide that I want to raise my hand and make my community better, that's something to be valued and be honored. Mr. Valentine, I know you don't do it for the thanks. You're not looking for, I don't have a major check for you tonight. But as your school board association, we certainly honor you for your commitment to the community, and we continue to support your leadership. And as always, for the entire board and the entire district, if there's anything that we can do as an association to continue to support you, that's what we're here to do. So let's give Mr. Valentine a round of applause.
Can we take a photo over here, please? Oh, why not? Oh, this is the real deal. Can I take a few? 1, 2, 3. Okay, good.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I would be remiss, one last quick thing. Capitol Conference 2023. Please make sure you all get registered. Even though registration is not open yet, just sit by the website and wait for that. But no, we look forward to a great conference. You all may have received the notification today. Our CEO, Rick Lewis, retired today. So it's been a kind of tough day for us at OSBA, but we are continuing to be focused on making sure that you all have the association that you need to move forward. So we look forward to seeing you all in November. And again, thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. Thank you so much.
All right, moving on to Tools, Career, and Technical Center update. Mr. Melody.
So just a quick update this evening. The report is attached to board docs, so you can read it in detail if you want. Just a couple of things to highlight. Facilities update. We did submit a grant for $18 million to the state of Ohio for the expansion of the High Bay Labs. hopefully that will be approved, or some portion of that will be approved. We will not hear about that until at least July, after the 1st of July. And additional facility update, which actually I don't see in here, is that we are obtaining permits to do the $1 million expansion of the cosmetology labs, 2 of those in the school. And then the other thing to note is the certificate ceremonies are tonight, which we are obviously not there. And there's also a second half of the certificate of ceremonies tomorrow evening. So if anyone's available and would like to attend, please let me know. And the rest of the update is there for your reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to Music Boosters Overview. Dr. Marshausen.
Chris Hickey, if you would like to come up and share where we are with our music boosters over the past year.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Good evening. Dr. Marchhausen and members of the board, thank you for giving me the time. My name is Chris Hickey. I am the outgoing president of the Dublin Music Boosters. So this evening I'm sharing a high-level overview of what we have done this past school year. So the Dublin Music Boosters, to my knowledge, is the only booster group in Dublin City Schools, is that correct? That serves K through 12 and distributes funds to curricular classrooms. So we raise funds with our work in the concession stand and our fund drive and extra donations throughout the school year. So the concession stand this year, we raised $108,882 in gross profits. That doesn't count our overhead. Our fund drive, where we go door to door and ask for donations, we raised $57,510 and $9,000 in extra donations. So we had 607 different parents fill 945 shifts in our concession stands over 3 schools. And here are the funds that we are giving directly back to Dublin City Schools. So 14 elementary schools, we give $200 to each school. Middle schools, we give $2,000 to each school. And then our high schools, the directors kind of divide what we give them based on need. And so this year we gave them a little under $84,000. So our total contribution to Dublin City Schools curricular classrooms was $96,693. So our projected budget for the next school year is $150,000. And that sounds like a lot of money, but I want to give you some context. So it has been at least, 13 years since we've been able to give any money to Kaufman for replacing instruments. So we have at least one instrument, I believe it's a saxophone that Dan Zuber played on when he was in high school. 48 years old. We have some instruments that are 35 years old. So we have some work to do. Because of the funds that we've been able to raise this year, along with the Performing Arts Fund that was created this year, thank you for that, we can finally start replacing some of those items. So I want to give you an example of costs for what our directors are facing, because it seems like a lot of money, but it doesn't really go particularly far. So a marching band show is about $15,000, and that is per school. That covers things like designers, drill riders, auxiliary items like flags, rifles, those types of things. A bassoon is going to be over $11,000. A tuba is going to be slightly less than $10,000. Tenor saxophone that we desperately need to replace at Kaufman, over $5,000. Marimbas are going to be close to $6,000. So the money doesn't go as far as you think it would. So I wanted to end with another thing that we give money to, which is our Jerry Arbett Scholarship. So we give this to 3 students from each high school, or we give it to 1 student from all 3 high schools. So I wanted to share you just a little bit about this year's recipients because they're amazing kids. So Kaufman's Corey Ham is going to be studying music education at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. Oli Williams at Scioto is going to the Ohio State University. She's going to be studying science, but also playing her tuba in some form in some band there. Michael Woolley, who is Jerome's recipient, is going to also go to the Ohio State University, and he will also be studying music education. So I just wanted to share what we've been up to. And just on a personal note, this is the end of my career as a parent in Dublin City Schools. My youngest is graduating on Sunday, and I just want to thank all of you for the incredible education that both of my daughters received at our schools. So thank you.
Thank you. Next up, what everyone came for, 5-year forecast.
Yeah, that's fine. Chris and Deanna, we appreciate all your help that you've done over the years and stuff for the Health and Music Boosters. And we appreciate all our groups, not only our music boosters, but our PTOs and our athletic boosters. So thank you again for the help and support of supplementing what we have here at Dublin City Schools. So thanks again. Now it's what everybody's waiting for, right? And I could go all night, right? I mean, I was going to let Tyson go, and he was going to be really quick, but then I said, no, it's too short, so I'll stay here. But no, this really, it's giving an update of what we have. Remember, October, we passed the first version of the 5-year forecast for the time period of July of 22 through June 30th, 2027. By law, just a reminder here, that we have to have this twice a year, passed by November 30th, and another update by the end of the month here. So after your approval this evening, we'll file everything with the Ohio Department of Education. So just for everyone out there, it's on the Ohio Department of Education's website, but also is on our website too, so everyone's out there having the information that we have. Just is something we have to do, but it's also why the purpose of doing it. It's given a good planning document, and it's given a snapshot of time. Just the kind of same stuff I said in October here, but just a reminder, this is a good planning tool for us. It's constantly, while we only approve it twice a year, and do that, it is something Tyson and I work on quite often throughout the year. Whether it's, hey, someone has an idea, John may have an idea, what would happen if we did this? To kind of just give an idea of what would cost out there. And I know we're going to have some bigger discussions come here after we're done with this forecast, but come June, and some decisions to make that this document is really imperative as we do that in different scenarios, whether it's security and additional personnel, or whether it's kindergarten and all day, or whatever it may be, just to give an opportunity. We can run different scenarios to kind of give you, as our job, I say one of the jobs of my office is to give you information for the decision makers to be able to make the best decision you can. So that's kind of what the purpose of it is. Like I said, it's a snapshot in time as of today. Something could change. I'm going to talk about the state budget, and by June 30th, I could be significantly different or about the same from that standpoint. So just a reminder of that. It's divided in two sections, revenue and expenditures. Our main sources of funding, we talk about this many times, is local and state funding. We seem to talk about state funding a lot because it's every 2 years that it's a new budget cycle, but really we're so predominant local, and you'll see one of the graphs in our local taxpayers with that. Just some updates. Really, I'm going to be honest with you, from a bottom support there, if you're looking at line 15.01, really not much difference if you go out through June of 2027. Pretty much the same as we get there, slightly better the first 3 years. A little different as we go forward here, but I want to talk about some of the key components, maybe talk about a little bit of what's changed that you've seen since October, and go from there, just different standpoints. House Bill 33, I talked about the new state budget is not yet finalized and continues the Fair School Funding Plan. If you're looking at the next 2 years through the House version of the plan, we would get in total additional $1.8 to $2 million. With that, $4 million additional the first year, but then we lose $2 million the following year. And you may ask, well, why is that? We're going through reappraisal now. In Franklin and Delaware counties, there is a component of property tax wealth. And so once that reappraisal hits that formula, that then drops us back down. As they're saying, we have less, more of the local share has to, in the state share, as more has to go on the local side of things. So with that being said, I talked about property value growth as one of my bullet points there. Our estimated here, like I said, we're in right now, Franklin and Delaware County. With what we're hearing, and this is a big change in the sense of valuation. We're currently at $4.3 billion right now in valuation. We project next tax year, which would be, if your mind, tax year is a year behind, so it'll be tax year 23, collection year 24. So when you get your bills in December of 2023 and the pay to be due in January of 2024, we estimate to be over $5 billion in valuation. And so what does that mean? Well, divide that by 1,000. 1 mil would be approximately $5 million in that standpoint. So just kind of idea of what's going on out there. I could get into House Bill 920 just a little bit here. While we'll see some growth with that reappraisal, it's not too huge and significant because as we talked about before a little bit with House Bill 920 is while those property values rise during reappraisal, the taxing amount for the voted levies that we have out there will go down because of that. So we'll get it on the inside millage, which is approximately 4.4, which is, I should say approximate, it is 4.4 mils. So while we do get a little bit of that, it's not as big of a windfall as some people would imagine. Also, discussion that we get questions. I know some of you as board members have gotten them before, and we've answered them as we go along. What about all the development that we've had up in the Jerome Village area and stuff like that? Well, first of all, one of those areas, Jerome Grand, for example, is TIFT. So we don't even get all the revenue from those, for example. That's a 10-year, 75% TIF. We only get 25% on that improvement. So that's one thing. But the rest of maybe that area is while we do get some on new construction, it's not enough to keep up with the students that we have coming out of that area. So it's, yes, we do get new monies from it, but not enough to keep up with what we have. So just talking about property tax collections, we're holding steady at about 99%, which is about right on what we've estimated. We haven't seen, even with, I know when in the Great Recession in 2008 times, tax collections have been pretty good, holding steady for the most part. So we've always either estimated anywhere between 97 to 99%, and we've held steady. Some years we've had more than 100%, and that means we're catching up on some of the delinquent properties too. Then from that standpoint, I talked about line 1501. I'm gonna wait till I'm gonna talk about a little what's next kind of type of situation, but that's kind of what of our guide is there. You see this slide. This is what I call my run rate slide. Here is our revenues versus expenditures. Our red line is our expenses as they continue to grow with enrollment growth, inflationary growth. As you continue to go straight forward, there as our revenues are flat. With that being said, like I said, we're only potentially maybe get more state funding of $1.8 million over 2 years. With House Bill 920, even with the great big change in reappraisal, they reduced the other voted millages down. So our revenue kind of stays relatively flat until we go out for another levy, whatever it may be, is when we would get new revenue, and then that blue line kind of goes up. Our neon green line there is kind of our cash balance as we're positive through 2025, and then we go down from that standpoint. So what that starts to tell you is, we're getting past, we kind of want to be at the end of, I hate to talk about a levy cycle. You want to be about 30 to 60 days. We're in that range in 25, so something needs to happen. In that, if you see that red line and that gap getting wider between the blue line, it's a combination of things, whether it's new revenue from levies, it's reduction in expenses as you go forward, or the combination thereof. You want to eventually get that gap and be more online with each other, and so that green line doesn't go all the way down into the negative. By law, we can't run a negative, unlike our federal government. We have to have a positive balance. So One of the things, and Tyson remind me, I'm sure the state will ask us since we are starting to show in years 4 and 5, or is it year 3? Is it year 3? So we'll be okay on this one. Now in October, if we were to show the negative, the state would say, what are you going to do to get those negatives in cash balance in years 3, 4, and 5 of the 5-year forecast? So people are looking at that, and they're monitoring even from the state level. Just there again, just ending cash balance, kind of showing that again in a different way there in that graph as we start to turn negative from that standpoint. Talk about revenues. I've hit on a lot of it already. I don't want to hit on too much, but I do want to mention one thing. That did change for FY23. We did come in about 9 to 10 million more than we had estimated, which is it seems like a lot, but we're over $250 million, so the percentage isn't as large as you would think. And you may ask, why is that? It's 2 reasons, primarily. One is we've talked about it. I've sit down with some of you, and I've talked about House Bill 126, and that's kind of the Board of Revision, Board of Tax Appeals thing. That came into effect in July of this year, so that's our fiscal year. That's the start of a fiscal year. And so we had a flurry of direct compensation payments as that time went along. Not to mention even after that time of July and kind of August, we had, even after our forecast time, we probably had another $1 million that came in from old agreements that we've had over 3 years. I believe even the multi-year agreements we've had in past years are done now. So we shouldn't have any more direct compensation unless House Bill 126 is changed. I know there was a potential legal action against it, potentially to reverse that. I'm not sure where that stands. We're not participating as our district in that legal action. So just to let you know. So that's one thing. That equivalent was approximately $9 million this year. That's over about 2.2 mil. So we'll see how that shakes out. I know one thing that was a little concerning. The first half collection here in January, or they settled in February, actually in Franklin County. They had $2 million in rebates in January just for the first half. It was $1 million a year ago, and then year before that was only like $300,000. So we're not sure. We're trying to dig in. We're hoping it's not the House Bill 126, or if it is, it's just the final shakeout for now. That we're not going to continue with this, or that's going to continue to rise as we go forward. So that's something we're monitoring on those rebates or refunds, I should say, from Franklin County to local taxpayers, whether it's residential or commercial properties. Another thing that we were a little higher on too was interest. You've watched the financial report as we go along. That was another big one. We had predicted interest rates maybe would start to decline. They have continued to stay high. And so that effect is in there, and then that effect is actually carried forward into future years, or at least till next year, as we say that they'll, I think temporarily, at least for the next year, maybe not as high as now, so any excess funds that we have that we do invest in, mind you, the most safest of investments, we'll continue to generate interest on that. So we did make that change for the following, for this next fiscal year. I've already talked about everything. We're waiting on the state budget. It's in the Senate now. Right now, they potentially may have a little bit of a change compared to what the House has, so we will continue to monitor and see how that goes, and then lobby on our behalf of our district as best we can. But as I've said here before, they don't really care what Dublin has to say, and they consider us either from an income or a property tax wise as a wealthy district, not knowing our district is very diverse, and whether it be socioeconomic in that standpoint. So that's just the way it is. Expenditures, really here we didn't really have hardly any changes there. We didn't make any differences from FY23. We're running real tight on what our estimates were for wages and benefits. which is about approximately 85%, almost 86% of what we do. That may seem a lot compared to other districts, but we do have a PI and a bond levy, so a lot of those capital expenses are pushed, where some districts may have to run it through the operating general fund. We run it through those funds. If you would have looked at prior to our passage in 2018, you would have probably saw our general fund. Those capital expenditures were a lot higher because we had run out of bond money authority at that point, did not have a PI levy at that point. So you would have saw, as you go into fiscal year 18 and then go into fiscal year 19, you would have saw higher amounts of capital expenditures at that point, which now is very low. So with that standpoint. So another thing too, this year we did pass with our associations those new 2-year agreements. So those have been factored into this forecast. And also any staffing plan items, changes that we've had, whether it's new enrollment growth. I know some of you, we've sat down and talked about how we develop a staffing plan. Those different factors are in there now with that, including our crop of 25 social workers have been in there. That's been factored in there, which would hit fiscal year 25 as we start the fall of 24, and that's fiscal year 25. So those have been factored in there. Any other changes that we may have that we'll talk about later, we'll run those in those scenarios with that, you as a board, whatever it may be. So just there again, another graph talking about expenditures, really nothing different. We did change purchase services a little bit. We did increase that one a little bit, and supplies actually went down. Purchase services were up a little bit. A lot of that was due to our subs that we have that we purchased through the ESC and running through there. We're going to dig in a little more to see if why is that as we compared with our things and kind of work with our curriculum and our building side of things and see maybe where we're at with that. So on the supply side, we're actually a little under, so we made an adjustment this year to move that down. We're actually probably running about $1 million less than expected on that side of things on supplies. So, which is a good thing. That could be anywhere from textbooks or electronic textbooks nowadays, or just general building supplies and different other items. We were pretty much right on. We had expected increases in fuel in different areas right there. So that didn't affect us. This is in different other areas with that. So ending cash balance. As you see there, I talked about this one already. We're in that 30 to 60 day window. At the end of 25, we're actually 42. And just to remind you too, is I've talked about this, I think in the fall, we talk about cash balance even when we go to our debt rating agencies, even though it's a different fund that pays for it. It's our debt service fund to pay for our debt. But our rating agencies do look at this, our general fund, and stuff like this. And so we've always say, hey, either we're going to have 30 to 60 days. While it's not in board policy, I would say it's the informal policy that we've carried forward. So that's kind of where we're at with that. We talked about positive ESSER funds. Some of the things that they've been able to do is, now we've added some things with that, as far as catching students up in different areas, which was part of ESSER 3 that we were required to do in that. But one of the things we've been able to do is help offset some general fund costs and push them over to ESSER funds. A big one has been our Chromebooks from that standpoint. So that was one thing that we normally would have. So once those funds will be out by next year. ESSER 3, we've already spent through ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. ESSER 2 has to be spent by this September. We've already done that, and we're well into ESSER 3 right now, which has to be spent by next September of 24. Staffing plan, just something to talk about. We want to make sure we're always efficient. I talk about expenses to maintain optimal levels that meets enrollment and the educational needs of our students. So we're always looking at that. With those growth of students in new buildings, that will add pressure on our existing resources and future needs. Our local taxpayers support anticipated. I think and I go to the questions part of it. Let me ask you if anyone has any questions, and then I'll kind of wrap up something else.
So just to clarify what you said earlier, this year Franklin County is reassessing all property values.
Yes.
We're expecting a 25 to 30% increase in property values and
Yes.
property taxes.
Yes. So,
But the schools will not see a
Windfall.
comparable
Yep.
increase.
Yeah, we will see a little bit of an increase, like I said, on the inside millage, but on the other 40-some mills, 46 mills of taxation, we will not see that on. So it's just on the small little, yes, it is a small increase, but it's not a huge windfall of thing with that. So keep an eye out on that, look at, you'll be getting that. I know it'll be a little sticker shock to some people, but if anyone's been following the real estate market, it is based off the last 3 years. Not only sales, but and other development and everything else. The reappraisals, when they go through, really do a deep dive. The previous one, which we had a big increase, was called the triennial update, and that's just based off of sales. So, so something to keep an eye out for with that. And that's, a lot of that's 80% of what we are is residential, and that's where we expect to see the big increase. We don't necessarily we'll see that on the commercial side of things. We'll probably see a little bit of an increase, but it's really on the residential side of things. And just a reminder for everyone here, I talked about House Bill 126 and border revision. We do not have any challenges or whatever you may want to call it for any residential property. It's all on commercial property. So just to let everyone know there, and that was one of the, I think the caveats of House Bill 126 and why it was kind of pushed through was you may have had some districts, and it may have been some of those districts around the Lake Erie there who had significant residential, maybe even people who didn't necessarily live there all year. For example, maybe they would go for their rental homes of some of those places. And so one of the things that House Bill 126 says, you can't even challenge residential properties, which we weren't doing in the first place. So.
Thank you.
Any additional questions for Mr. Kern? All right.
Let me wrap up here real quick here. I think it's imperative as we look here is when do we go for the next levy, as you see in FY25, that we do have that 30 days balance, and then the next year we have that big decline. As you see that gap growing between the red and I believe it was a blue line going through between revenue and expenses there, when's the optimal level? So just for example, if we went this November, we would start collecting in January of next year. If we wait till March, which would be the next opportunity after that, which would be the presidential primary, which typically is in the May, but since it's a presidential election year, and there was some discussion at the state level that it would be moved back to May, it is still going to be, as far as we know, stay in March from that standpoint. You would have to wait till the full filing year to get any collections. So what does that do? What that does is as you wait and the longer you go out, which is nice because the longer you've gone out, but then your ask is going to be a little higher from that standpoint. So I would recommend we potentially start looking at this November, kind of the look at if that makes the most sense from that standpoint from us as a district and you as a board who has to vote on it, which, by the way, a supermajority needs to approve it, so it have to be 4 out of the 5 for that. From that standpoint is to start looking at November. I think another thing, and I'm going to hit on Jeff here a little bit too here, is to talk about, I don't know if he was going to talk about in his section a little bit, but I think if we would look at another elementary to ease some of that crowding in the northwest part of the district, is as costs continue, the longer and longer we wait, costs continue to rise. The availability to get it done when we would want to probably open by the fall of 25. And that standpoint is with all the projects going on in the area with construction, whether you have the Intel or you have the Honda battery plant now, with that is kind of, I think that allows us some time and maybe potentially save some costs. So Jeff, maybe if you want to talk about something.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. If the last few months, when I say the last few months, last 15 to 18 months is any indication of what the next 15 to 18 months will look like, costs couldn't go up 30, 40%. So we're at a very odd crossroads here in Central Ohio of supply and demand with all the projects that Brian mentioned. And you see in the news about inflation. I mean, the Federal Reserve came out today that they want to raise interest rates again to slow down inflation. So when you have both inflation and heavy supply and demand in our area, just as an example, and these numbers are not exact, but they're close. When we built our last elementary school in 2018, it cost us roughly $295 a square foot, and we're looking at close to $500 a square foot on the next one. And keep in mind, when we hire a contractor, by the contracts we give them, by the agreement, they have to get 3 bids for every piece. So it's not like it's all very competitive. That's just the market rate right now. So yeah, right now, everything we're seeing is the longer we wait, if the past is, the last few months is any indication, then it's going to increase.
I think one of the other considerations when we look at timing for potential levies is voter turnout. Historically, we have benefited with the higher voter turnout. There may be an issue on the ballot in November that would drive turnout. And it's something that also has to be monitored, is what would we anticipate turnout being in November as you consider putting efforts together. But I do think, as Mr. Kern pointed out, we have been pretty steadfast that we were looking at March. I think it is at least worth revisiting and exploring what do things potentially look like if we were to put something together for November of '23. We know that middle school is critical, that elementary school will be critical as we look at the 12 modular classrooms, Mr. Melody's favorite topic, that are now in place up at NAP.
Any other questions, or that's kind of my wrap up. Just a thing for the boards to consider. We'll have our laptop and our spreadsheets ready to go, and we can run anything you guys want to with that situation. So
The 5-year forecast, obviously, and the comments that have been mentioned by, I guess, all 3 of you guys tonight, with regards to the potential levy, bring us into a whole nother bigger discussion. And obviously the 5-year forecast is relevant to that, but where do we go from here in terms of board discussion, the evaluation of that decision, and what a timeline would look like?
So timeline would be at least from a statutorial standpoint, and if Mr. Stott was still here, we could have asked him too again, but the first vote would have to be by July 10th. And the second vote, we have 2 votes always on it, and the second vote would be by August 1st. Pretty tight, but doable.
I think planning-wise, the first thing is to pull together the Finance Committee, which is the board president and vice president with Brian and I, to look at numbers, and then to prepare something potentially for June that would be an entire board discussion for one of the June board meetings.
Questions or comments on that from board members? All right. Well, we will look forward to that committee meeting and reporting back out and hearing what your recommendation is. Moving on to board education discussion action items. We've got 2 items listed for this evening. We have the student representative update here in a second. But first, OSBA discussion. Mrs. De Silva had brought up in her role as our liaison with OSBA at our last meeting, potential recommendations for the legislative platform that will be discussed in the fall. And if you want to elaborate any further on that, the one discussion that I brought up is in the past we've typically tried to stay away from resolutions where it may be perceived, it may be the best word, as political, and that there's other avenues for us to potentially provide our thoughts or recommendations to anything that OSBA may be doing in terms of the legislative platform. But I know that's something you're passionate about, and you obviously have taken an active role as our OSBA rep. So hand it over to you for any additional comments.
I just wanted to give just an overview of the process just to make sure that everyone just knows how it works. So each year, the OSBA allows member school boards to propose amendments to the OSBA legislative platform, which, if you haven't read it or don't know where to find it, it's ohioschoolboards.org/platform. And the OSBA Legislative Platform Committee reviews all of the proposed changes in August when they meet to go over all the recommendations that have been passed by boards. And they then present those to the delegate assembly, which is at the November meeting that was mentioned earlier. So the submission deadline is May 31st. The platform informs OSBA's advocacy, I guess you could call them lobbyists, I don't know, informs them on what they can and cannot discuss with legislators. So if it's not in the platform, they can't say they're for or against it. They just don't touch it. The way that they have required us to make changes or propose changes is to pass a resolution. So that's how they require the boards to do that. Now, you aren't required to make a resolution, but if you want to make a change, that's how you do it. And that's all. I just want to make sure everyone's aware of the process.
Yeah, the process.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. Unless there's a motion from the floor on that, we will continue to move on to student rep updates at this time. All right. Will.
Okay, so I don't really have a report. It's more of a collection of comments. But the first comment is a thank you to the Board of Education, to all of you guys, and to Dr. Marshausen for allowing this position to exist and for allowing us to create this position. I think it was about a year and a half ago that we first kind of approached you guys. The annoying, juniors were like, we want a student voice. And you guys were like, why not? You gave us the opportunity, and I'd like to say that we took that opportunity as far as we could, and I'm incredibly grateful for that, and I know the other 3 juniors are incredibly grateful for that opportunity as well. And, reflecting back on the past year, I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish in only a year. Actually, it's about like 9 months, but we've been able to meet with about 4 or 5 different elementary schools and just talk with the students there about transitions and how stressful they can be and, kind of easing those concerns. We've been able to kind of form a mini focus group. Yeah, that's what it's called, focus group, with different teachers and administrators from across the district with Mr. Wolf regarding the importance of student mental health support. And obviously, we've been able to provide monthly reports on student concerns and student priorities with the goal of providing comprehensive district-wide student voice, which has been incredibly awesome. And we have 4 juniors next year who are going to be taking over for us. And I think all 4 of the seniors have incredible confidence in the job that they're going to be able to do in continuing the legacy of this position. But I think it's also something that, the 4 seniors, we weren't able to accomplish everything that we wanted to. But I think that we've laid the groundwork for that. So I think it's going to be really awesome to see how these 4 juniors in the next class and the class after that continue to run with this position and push the limits and see what's possible when we really give students the power to speak their minds. And the last thing, and I haven't really talked too much about this, but when we talk about Dublin City Schools setting a standard or setting a precedent for other school districts to follow, that can be the case with boring adult things like the strategic framework or something like that. Sorry. But it can also be the case with really okay, I have to be careful what I say here now. With equally interesting and valuable things like this position, we have 2 different school districts from across the state now who are reaching out to us, who are saying, how do we emulate this plan? How can we also get a student representative on our boards of education, including New Albany and Milford? And my hope is that continues to spread as students continue to understand the importance of having a voice in the decision-making process. So thank you guys. We really appreciate it, and good luck next year to the 4 juniors. You guys are going to do awesome.
Well, on behalf of the board, we just want to thank you guys. It's pretty crazy to think that it seems like it's been longer than a year and a half at this point. And tonight, as you heard the OSBA rep come and present to me on the 20 years, it wasn't, it feels like just yesterday I was right around your guys' age, and I ended up deciding to run for this position. And the legacy that you guys have left after, as you guys graduate and move on Sunday, is something very special and unique. I think you're going to be able to look back at it, and who knows where life is going to take you. But if it ends up being back in Dublin, to be able to have your kids go through the system just like mine are at this point, and know that you are important in creating the role and the student representation as it relates to the board and the district and all the meaningful ways that it impacts change. So thank you on behalf of the school district. We have bags for each of the 4 seniors with a little memento, so that as you go off to college, you can make sure that you put your coffee or apple juice or water in the awesome cup that it has for Dublin City Schools. And always remember, you got a home here in Dublin. I don't know if anybody else from members of the board would like to say anything.
I would. I just want to say thank you. It's been a joy having you guys on the, school board, and we've always looked forward to your reports and your smiling faces at the events, and I just wish you all well.
Yeah, I'd just like to second that being on the board for 16 years, the last couple of years having the student voice being heard at the board meetings has been great opportunity to hear straight from the source. So thank you.
I just have one question. As you transition, I'm just curious, what is your positive takeaway and something that you would work to improve and, for the future members?
I'd say I think my positive takeaway is that there are a lot of things that we hear in the world about people in power who don't necessarily want to share that power, or I don't know. I guess that there's just kind of that understanding that there's almost like this generational thing, right? Where we have students and we have a lot of different kids in our generation who are very passionate about a lot of different issues, but feel like they don't have the opportunity to share that voice and to share their perspective. And I think it's really refreshing to see that there are adults out there who are willing to say, no, your perspective is valuable, and we want your perspective to be heard. So I think that has been really heartening along the way. And a negative or like a...
Not a negative, just,
Okay.
just a challenge
Something-
or an opportunity or something that, you foresee the next group being able to accomplish that maybe you didn't get to, like you said.
Okay, yeah. I'd say, again, like I said earlier, just continue to push, what you think is possible, but continue to expand what the position means and what it is. I think that, one of the big things that we did was we had a district email account, but as Ms. Vende probably knows, not too many people have used the email account. So it's one of those things where it's like maybe using that or the existing infrastructure that we have to expand our position even more. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your hard work. I remember it being an idea, and here we are. Good luck next year to all of you guys. It's really refreshing when we can come in here and hear about cafeteria food and some other lighter issues sometimes. So I really appreciate everything that you've put into this.
And I'd like to thank the 4 of you for not only coming up with the structure for this position, but taking it so seriously. And it's not just showing up twice a month at board meetings. I get a smile on my face when I look at community events where the district is represented. And I think 2 or more of you have been at each of those events, representing our students and your position. And it is wonderful to see the responsibility and ownership you've taken in something that you created. And our challenge to next year's seniors is to continue that and to take it with the same level of ownership and responsibility. And to the 4 of you, thank you. I know you are incredibly busy. I think it's awesome to hear the 4 of you talk that you've become friends because of this, because I think the 5 people sitting up here would say that over the last year or so, they've become closer because of this too. And thank you for all that you've done. I'd like to invite the 4 of you and the board members over for a quick picture so that before we move on with the meeting, we can get a group shot of the 9 board members. That would be great.
All right, nobody has signed up for public participation this evening. Moving on to reports and action items from the superintendent's office. Dr. Marshausen.
Thank you very much. Thanks to our Student Advisory Council, the 5 of them who are here with us tonight. Even though the weather didn't cooperate with us for dodgeball, the event was a success, raising almost $33,000 for the Dublin Food Pantry. I'd like to thank our team here, Keyburn Grady, Tanya Ewert, for helping lead our seniors and our Student Advisory Council in this work. As always, tremendous community support. And I know that our team had an after-event review on the Monday following to consider, since we've moved it from indoors to outdoors, what are our plans when we get that thunderstorm cell that's not supposed to last for 3 hours and does. So we'll be working on plans in the future. It was exciting to watch all the little kids run their school tournaments and the high schools run their school tournaments. At the end of the day, the success is what we were able to donate to our friend Dinky and all of the leaders over at the Dublin Food Pantry. As we look at the work that we've done this year with our Business Advisory Council, one of the things in a post-COVID world and coming in as superintendent as we moved through that is the bylaws of our Business Advisory Council were pretty direct in that it shouldn't be a lifetime appointment. And the membership should be able to roll through cycles. So in a growing business and economic community, we're able to invite new people to share new ideas with our group. So last year, we transitioned some people with, starting with the legacy of Paige and moving Paige to an emeritus role with the BAC. This year, we will be moving some new members to an emeritus role and thanking some other members and having them serve on some of our committees and so forth. We've invited 8 new people to join our Business Advisory Council, and I think right now we're batting 1,000, and they're all saying yes. So we're excited to invite and welcome new people to our BAC, and we will start with those new folks joining us in September, and we will have our last event next Wednesday in partnership with the City of Dublin. We'll have our last meeting for the year next Wednesday of the BAC. Our stakeholder groups, which now number 7, with over 340 people participating, and we had 41 stakeholder group meetings this past school year. At the suggestion of Mrs. DeSilva, and it was a great suggestion, we used a survey on our admin to ask their feedback on the PD that we gave our admin staff this year. We used a similar survey with our stakeholder groups, and the response so far has been solid, overwhelmingly positive, but some key areas that we can improve. So those surveys right now are still open, and we are grateful that our stakeholder groups are providing that feedback as we aim to make their time and our time the most valuable time that we can spend together as we gather feedback and have that authentic engagement with our stakeholder groups. When we look at our communications improvements throughout the year, our next Dublin United will hit mailboxes in mid-June. We are grateful for our Who to Contact page. And one of the challenges that 2 of the people sitting at this table challenged me with when I was hired was to redo the website. And those revisions and updates to our website have really created a better means of communication that Dr. Schwanke will talk about a little bit in her presentation. That Who to Contact page has helped. And one of the things that as leaders, and I know sometimes as board members, you get this too, are those anonymous communications. And as we often remind our parents that we like to be able to follow up with comments and concerns, anonymous communications are often difficult. When we receive anonymous communications that identify threats or bullying or safety and health issues, we of course do our best to follow up. When we receive anonymous communications that aren't of that nature, most of the time they get glanced at and then filed. We encourage parents to trust that as a leadership team, we go out of our way to ensure that parents' concerns and questions and behaviors never impact their students' experience in our schools. And I think some of us up at this table know who some of our most frequent emailers are, and we go out of our way to make sure parents' concerns never impact what happens with their kids in schools. We all want to make this the best school district that's possible, and we all know that we don't always get it right, that there are times we can improve, there are times that we need to know things that maybe we don't want to know. And we encourage parents to use the Who to Contact page and to allow us to engage in that deep, meaningful conversation so that we could be the very best school district that we can be. Any questions from the board? You have first readings for several policies. I don't know if Chris, if Mr. Valentine or Mrs. DeSilva have anything that you would like to add on those first readings? Okay. There are also some technical corrections that we'll be asking you to vote on this evening. The technical corrections are merely changes in names and positions to make sure that our policies are in line with who's actually working here.
I guess I'll turn the mic on. So a lot of the policies related to tobacco use or tobacco prevention are adding nicotine and vaping to the policy. Policy 5512 adds the educational programming paragraph that was just left off previously, so that was added on. I'm just trying to look for highlights because there's so many of them. Significant change to the technology policy is adding parameters around AI and natural language processing tools. So that's one that you definitely want to read through, and particularly the huge green block with all of the little starred bullet points. Policy
Just
8
real quick to jump in on that,
Yeah,
one of the
go
things that we talked about as well was don't be surprised if we are continually coming back to that policy because of the obviously ever-changing nature. We also asked Jessica to give us an update as to what other school districts were doing around the area, what their approach was
Right.
with it, and it sounds like everybody is pretty much doing similar to what we're talking about doing here, and even at that, some districts that are neighboring that you might think have done stuff haven't done anything at this point. So we are at the tip of the spear and one of the first people to do anything in this space.
Right. Another thing to point out, because you'll see some volunteer policies that are just deleted. Those were deleted because they're duplicated elsewhere. There's also a volunteer policy update just requiring volunteers who are coaching to have a activity permit. Anything else that stands out, Chris? that we
The
should-
other area was the finances with booster organizations and just the reporting, if you want to briefly touch, just given its relevancy.
Yeah, I think we have compared to talk about other districts, a fairly comprehensive support organization. I think it's 9211 from that standpoint and what we require. We also require financials, fundraising activities, and stuff like that from the activities to be submitted to my office, and we review those as they go forward. What some of these revisions just give it a little, I'd say a little more teeth to it. A little expand on what maybe previously they have given to us from that standpoint. So not a dramatic change, but I would say just a little more detail than what they may have provided previously. We always while they are, I'll just remind everyone though, I talked about Music Boosters and thanking them, who do a really good job with that from that standpoint but different other groups and everything, they do a fine job, but they are legally separate organizations. But unfortunately, unfortunately, they're tied to what we do. They're here in existence to support us. And so we want within their members, whether it be the building PTO, whether it be the football boosters or whatever it may be, to have an open and transparency with their members and what they do. So just different things like that. One of the things I think that we do too that's even more expanding, it wasn't even a change in there, is require, due to things that have happened in the past, is we require them to have dishonesty bond coverage that we purchase for them as a district. That's been in the policy, that they then reimburse us for to make sure that in case they do have some things, errors or any other fraudulent activity is, that they're made whole from that standpoint. So while they're legally separate, they work together with us, and we just want to make sure that the policies have a little more oomph to them and teeth.
A couple more.
Sorry, I drug on.
No, that's okay. So 8462, student abuse and neglect, that's in alignment with an Aaron's Law requirement. And then 8400 is that school safety that outlines state and national threat assessment protocols. And Dr. Marshausen, did you want to say anything about that one?
No, we're thankful that we have Mr. Collier and our partnership with the police who we are a step ahead of most places by having that security position who keeps us up to date with that. Really, we've been doing this and now we're playing catch up with policy, but we've been in compliance with the requirement even before we got caught up with policy.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay, and then finally, on the board agenda this evening is the approval of,
We've got the approval of, do we need to do the?
oh, you want to do this first?
Yeah, let's do that. It's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve the attached policies, technical corrections. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva,
A second?
second by Mr. Melody. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Dr. Marshausen.
The second reading for those policies and the ones that were first reading will be at the next board meeting. We have on the agenda the approval of 2 separate 30-year non-school TIFs, one from Union County and one from Jerome Township. First, I would like to thank our partners in both Union County and Jerome Township. Mrs. Davis, thank you for being here this evening. As we've worked really hard to reach a solution that is best for the residents and taxpayers in the Dublin City School District. As we look at growth and potentially residential growth, we know with that in a school district such as ours, it means more students. And we know with each student comes additional cost. And as we talk about elementary number 15 and potentially high school number 4, as a destination district, as houses are built, we know that students will follow. Unfortunately, during this process, which started really for us back in December, as a school district, we've kind of been put in the middle. We've been asked to make a decision. My recommendation this evening is that we approve both 30-year non-school TIF proposals, one from Union County and one from Jerome Township. And we allow the Ohio Department of Taxation and the subdivisions themselves to come to a solution. My hope is that however this works out, we have a 30-year non-school TIF, which makes our school district whole. So that will be the recommendation this evening, is that both proposals from partners in Union County and our partners in Jerome Township, that the board approved each individually, and with the hope of it being a non-school TIF, however it works out.
Mrs. De Silva?
I'm just getting prepared.
Oh, okay. Scott, were you going to? Okay. To go back to discussion, I think that one of the general things that we've talked about is our duty to protect the taxpayers. This is an odd situation in my 20 years now, I guess, of doing this, that we have not necessarily been here. And in order to choose the route, I guess, that is going to give us the most protection, knowing that this is likely going to end in litigation from one side or the other. Just to reaffirm, this is the route that both you and legal counsel is advising at this stage, as well as Mr. Kern. All right.
I'm good.
All right. If there are no additional comments, we will move on to item 6D. It's recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the attached resolution. A resolution approving the passage by the Board of Education of the Dublin City School District, Franklin, Delaware, and Union Counties, Ohio, of an ordinance approving a real property tax exemption pursuant to Ohio Revised Code, Section 5709, and authorizing the execution of a compensation agreement related thereto. And this is with Union County. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second? Second by Mrs. De Silva. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mr. Valentine?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Approval of item 6E. It is recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve the attached resolution. This resolution is with Jerome Township. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Rigby. Questions or comments? Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mr. Valentine?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Very quickly, Mr. Kern and Dr. Marshausen, for the sake of the public on a where do things potentially go from here? I know Mr. Stout isn't here from a legal counsel standpoint, but what this likely looks like so that the public who, or what this possibly looks like, so that the public may have an idea for those who tune in or follow up on the minutes.
Well, I think both political entities will have to act on the 30-year non-school TIF that was proposed. If both act on the 30-year non-school TIF that we have approved, then it'll end up in the hands of the Ohio Department of Taxation to decide where that lands. Probably going to take a little bit of time at this point.
I think that's it. I think that's where we're at with that from this standpoint. Maybe they can come together in the meantime and have a different mutual agreement. But I think that's, from that standpoint, Dr. Marshausen, I think, is right on.
All right. Thank you. Reports and action items from the Treasurer's Office.
Several things on, I talked about the 5-year forecast, so you don't want me to redo that. But that approval is on this evening. We have 2 student activity purpose clause. We have this Sato High School peer collaboration, which is a great program between our special ed students and our regular ed students and working together. I think it's a great opportunity. And then the Community Interpreter Fund. Really, this is not necessarily a student activity, but this is more, I call an activity fund. If you think lit conference, this is the same thing kind of for the EL world of things. So the idea is it will be kind of self-sustaining professional development in the EL world. And Chris, I don't know if you had any other comments that you wanted to talk about that, but that's what that is. Our maintenance. Approval of baseball workers. This is our people who work our high school fields as many groups, whether it be travel, whether it be DYA. They make sure our fields stay pristine as they work through, whether it's lining, dragging, wherever else may happen throughout the summer. The rentals that we have, with that money and those rentals going back and to go back into the baseball programs, or in some cases softball programs at each high school. And on donations, from the Eversole Run PTO to the principal front of Eversole Middle School, and the quarterback club for some new lockers over at Kaufman High School, and then the values on there. And like I said before, whether it's the music boosters, Kaufman Quarterback Club, Eversole Run PTO, we appreciate all our groups and what they do.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Kern?
I do have a question on the community interpreter activity. So, who is this activity for specifically? Are they teachers or?
So we're fortunate to have an individual, Teresa Troyer, who is this TCI licensed trainer. And what she will do is train our bilingual aides, but also the bilingual aides in surrounding districts. And so we have to purchase materials and supplies for the training for the participants. but we're also going to charge an additional fee for other districts who come in and do our training, and that's where we'll then use those that revenue to help us increase our staff development and training.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? All right. It's recommended by the Treasurer that the Board of Education approve items 7B, 7C, 7D, and 7E. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Melody. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby,
Yes.
Mr. Melody,
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva,
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis,
Yes.
and Mr. Valentine.
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Reports from the Department of Academics and Student Learning.
Okay, just a few updates tonight. First, Mrs. De Silva mentioned the policy committee, and I just want to thank both Mr. Valentine, Mrs. De Silva, and also the three principals that serve on that committee, Mrs. Pallone, Mr. Perrell, and Mr. Socklaben, who give a lot of time to read through those policies. And a special thank you to Janet Grenison. It's a massive amount of work to get all these things together, and she puts together beautiful packets so that nobody gets lost, which is much appreciated. Dr. Marshausen also mentioned the dodgeball tournament. A special thank you to Keyburn and Cassie and Tanya Ewert for their hard work on that. And a fun little story, the Riverside students were devastated by those thunderstorms because they were the defending champions. They did not know how to cope with this cancellation. So Mrs. Pallone and her team hosted a staff versus student tournament today. And I have some pictures we'll put in the board report. So it was, Mrs. Pallone's words were, "I hit it out of the park today." So we'll take that as a celebration. Another noteworthy event that's happening tomorrow, the Glacier Ridge students participated in a contest and won. So the Harlem Globetrotters will be coming tomorrow to put on a special assembly for the Glacier Ridge school. They won't all fit in Glacier Ridge, though, so thanks to the Transportation Department, we are transporting a school of elementary students down the road to Jerome High School, and they will get a special presentation by the Harlem Globetrotters, and NBC4 will be there to cover the event. So thanks to Dr. Curdy and his team for putting together that special experience for his students. On the agenda tonight for a vote is the handbooks. This is the final read. Another thank you to Mrs. De Silva for her, I teased her, she's Tiffany Eagle Eye is what she is, because she can find all the tiny little errors we found. I think you found 4 more today, just technical errors that we have fixed. Another question that Mrs. De Silva asked was about translation. And so we've spent the last couple weeks figuring out the best way to have these handbooks available in any language. And appreciation to Cassie, who said, well, let's just, rather than have them as a standalone PDF, let's embed them in the website. So that's what we will do upon approval, is we will create a web page with each handbook. I believe this will make them not only translatable, but also easy to access and easy to find and search for information. So that simple question ended up making us a lot better. So thank you so much. Our parents will have quick, easy access to all the portions of the handbook. Now I want to draw your attention to the next slide. This is just a quick celebration. In the past, since January, our communications department has really focused on our social media stories. And I'm reporting on this tonight as a side note because as Mrs. Benny's plate gets full with community engagement, I've been working with the communications team. And you will see on here some really strong engagement rates, well above our marketing benchmarks. Usually 1 to 5% is average on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Their average is 0.035. So we are far above that. 0.5 is actually outstanding. And given the changes happening at Twitter, that's great. We also, you'll see a decline in comments, which is indicative of our stories being thorough and complete. And I really want to thank Keyburn, Cassie, and Tanya. They've really focused on social media. They have improved our graphics. Cassie's extremely proficient writing skills make our messaging very clear and easy to follow. So the other thing is this team has dedicated themselves to telling the story of our district. So they have intentionally added on adding a human element to all the posts. So you can see there, like the Wyandotte Duck Rescue was huge on Facebook, one of our top 5 posts of the year. people like stories and they like the human element. So thank you to them for that, for the time they're putting into that. Next up is going to be a training for our internal staff, our principals, and the staff at our buildings to make sure that all of our schools understand the power of the social media footprint. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Marple and Mr. Andres for what I believe is a team update, right? Collaborative?
That's correct.
Okay, take it away.
All right, good evening. Mr. Andres and myself are going to share some details tonight regarding our decision after piloting NWEA's Map Reading Fluency Dyslexia Screener throughout this year to shift and use Amplify's M-Class DIBELS 8 dyslexia screening tool starting this fall. So you can see the graphic up there. Amplify is the company, M-Class is the electronic platform, and DIBELS is the name of the screener. And you'll hear us talk about that probably a lot over the next year. This decision came after a team reviewed 6 different screeners, including the 4 that had originally been on the state-approved list, and reflecting on our pilot experience with Map Reading Fluency. But before I go into the details of that, I want to start by reminding you of where we are with the dyslexia legislation today. You may remember that at this time last year, the state was ready to release a list of dyslexia screeners, but they were delayed a bit. And so the implementation of the screener was pushed back to this coming fall of 23. But regardless of that pushback from the state, we as a district decided we wanted to go ahead and screen our students, and that led us to that pilot. But starting next school year, districts across the state will be required to administer a Tier 1 dyslexia screening measure to all students in grades K through 3. So we practiced this year, and next year we'll do it officially. Our grades 1 through 3 students, they'll be screened at the beginning of the year. Our kindergartners, per law, will be screened mid-year. Transfer students and those that parents or teachers request will all be followed in accordance with the guidebook and the timelines there. And then students that are determined to be at risk from that Tier 1 dyslexia screener will be progress monitored, and we can administer a Tier 2 dyslexia screener for students to dig deeper. After next year, the law will just require that we screen our kindergartners and our transfer students as they come in. So why shift to DIBELS 8 after this pilot? There were really 3 reasons that led to this change for us as a district. One is that Map Reading Fluency was given full group. Students put on headphones, they spoke into microphones. It was efficient, but our teachers like the act of assessing side by side. There's power to that, especially with younger students, less technology blunders that occur. And so with DIBELS 8, the teacher actually sits beside the student for the one-on-one screening after intense training, and that's one of the big reasons. The second benefit to DIBELS 8 is that they offer a Tier 2 screener called Lectura, and that is will support our Spanish speakers and allow us to learn more about what that screening means for some of our multilingual learners. Even though it's only available in Spanish, we believe seeing what that looks like for our Spanish speakers may also give us information about many of our other languages, which is something that in a district as diverse as Dublin City Schools, we want to make sure we're keeping our eye on. We have many students who move to us during those K-3 years, and we know that they don't have that language piece initially. And then the third reason why we as a district will be shifting to DIBELS 8 is because we've worked hard across our departments to think about our alignment of our assessments in Tiers 1, 2, 3, and our special education. And this will help us progress towards stronger alignment and streamlined assessment practices. So with that said, I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Andres to continue.
Thanks, Lori. I was going to ask Will what DIBELS stood for. So the dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, in case you were wondering what DIBELS was. And what it will look like, as Lori said, it's going to be a one-on-one administration in the classroom or just outside the classroom in a quiet environment. Depending on the grade level, students are going to be given a group of these 1-minute assessments, such as phoneme segmentation fluency, letter naming fluency, oral reading fluency, just to name a few. And since they're 1 minute in length, kids will need, again, depending on the grade level, between 3 and 6 minutes to complete that screening. As Lori mentioned earlier, the law requires the students to, in K3, to take this one time, but we plan on administering it 3 times, or what they call benchmarking. So once in the fall, at the beginning of the year, once in the middle of the year, and once at the end of the year. One key point I'd like to make around the scoring and assessment of these 1-minute measures is, you know, if you've ever talked to a kindergartner, sometimes you're not sure what they're actually going to say, and it throws you for a loop. So the scoring and administration manual of these measures is 141 pages long. It details each situation that you might encounter to ensure that we're giving these measures with fidelity. So for example, in the phoneme segmentation area, there are rules on how to score a word if the student says additional sounds, has sounds elongation, partial segmentation, overlapping segmentation, pronounces a segment, does not segment, spells the word, or omits a sound. And you're going through word after word after word for 1 minute with a student. It sounds easy and it's very complex. So we've never used Amplify's M-Class DIBELS 8 from the University of Oregon, ever. But we have used curriculum-based measurements in the district for a long time. You might have heard the words EasyCBM or AIMSweb. So we've done this for a while. A lot of our staff are familiar in how this works. All they'll need to do is acclimate themselves to a new platform. So last week we held our first 6-hour Train the Trainer session. We plan to hold another training session in June with a great person from Amplify who I thought did a pretty nice job with us. And so we'll have over 50 staff next year that can train each person in our building who need to do this. We'll also have building administrators get trained this summer, and then our staff will get trained by those trainers in the fall, and then have a coaching and peer support network as we begin this journey for next year. And at this point, Lori and I are happy to take any questions.
Any questions from members of the board? All right. Item 9C. It is recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education, approve items 9A and 9B. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. De Silva. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
And Mr. Valentine?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Operations, Mr. Stark.
Good evening. I only have a couple of items on the agenda tonight. The first one is we're asking the board to approve an attached resolution to extend our food service agreement with Sodexo. The Sodexo agreement is a 1-year agreement that could be extended up to 4 times. So this would be our first renewal, and this would give us for the next school year starting in July through June. And the other item up for approval tonight is this is kind of an annual thing. There's a resolution for 3 agreements with the City of Dublin, and this is for their camps. Every year the City of Dublin holds their camps at some of our schools. How many schools is really dependent upon their enrollment and what schools we have available. And what I mean by available is we don't have any capital projects. So for example, Wyandotte is usually every year, but we're putting a new roof on the gymnasium this year, so it can't be by Wyandotte. This year it'll be at Hopewell Elementary and Scottish Corners. And we provide the food, the transportation for any field trips, and the facility. And these agreements just basically outline how they'll reimburse us for that and the liability insurances.
Questions for Mr. Stark?
I have one question. It's more of a technical question, I guess. So on the renewal, it says it's dated as June 15, 2023. Is that when this officially takes?
I think that's when
effect?
we're signing it. It'll officially take effect at the
All right.
beginning of the school year.
Okay, thank you.
Is that, Brian, I think that's how I read it when you read it.
I believe so.
All right. I did not get a motion yet, correct?
No.
Yep. It's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve items 11A and 11B. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Rigby. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
And Mr. Valentine?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Human Resources.
Good evening, Dr. Marchhausen and Mr. Kern, members of the board. I'll start out our HR section with the certified agenda tonight. You'll see one administrative contract that's on tonight's agenda for renewal. And then there are 3 certified resignations and 7 new hires. And we're just over 80% staffed in terms of our teachers for next school year. So we're making good progress. You'll see several recommendations for summer work. As we wrap up our school year, we're making sure that summer school is ready to begin on time. And then the supplemental and pupil activity contracts that are on tonight, they exclusively cover athletics for next school year. When moving on to the classified agenda, you'll see 4 resignations and 2 retirements. Nancy Kraus will be retiring as Kaufman's guidance secretary. She has 26 years in our district. And then Judy Staub will retire as administrative secretary from Deer Run Elementary with 11 years in Dublin. There are 6 new hires on tonight, salary changes, and a few unpaid leave of absence requests. And just like in the certified section, you'll see several recommendations for summer work that are on tonight for your consideration and approval. And then moving on to stipends, there are 3 stipends that are on tonight for your consideration. One is just a revision of summer title work from our last meeting, which updates the staff to receive this. The second is for English learners at the secondary level who are emerging English learners and will be paid out of Title III funds. And then the final stipend was for the Dublin Literacy Conference. It's from earlier this year. It was inadvertently not included as part of an earlier recommendation, and that has been rectified going forward. And then that concludes the HR portion for tonight.
Any comments or questions? It's recommended by the superintendent, the Board of Education approve items 13A, 13B, and 13C. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Gillis. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Melody?
Yes.
Mrs. Gillis?
Yes.
Mrs. De Silva?
Yes.
Mrs. Rigby?
Yes.
And Mr. Valentine?
Yes, motion passes 5-0. Communications and community engagement.
Good evening. Tonight, I'm pleased to share about 3 examples of community engaged learning that's happening in our buildings. It is the end of the school year. We're round and third headed for home, but it is definitely, our buildings are alive with activity, and our community members are out in full force supporting our students' learning. The first example I wanted to share was at Wright Elementary School. Last week, they had a Career Awareness Week, and every year this initiative evolves. They have activities at each grade level, and they have speakers, events, and experiences for all of their students. Their team believes that early exposure to the world's opportunities encourages their students to take advantage of the things in our school district later on when they know about more about the opportunities and also things they might want to explore and do when they're older. This week, they culminated the whole career week, or last week, they culminated with a 5th grade career fair, and they had about 20 members of our community from different businesses and organizations in their cafeteria, and the kids cycled around to each of the tables, and they had clipboards, and they asked us questions. It was so interesting to hear how curious they were about what jobs actually do, and then the kinds of skills that we use that are very important in our work. And they wanted to learn about all of the jobs. They were eager at every single table for a full hour. Shout out to school counselor Whitney Shelton and principal Lucas Bauer for their partnership with community members on this event. The next example is from Eversole Run. They've just wrapped up a month-long cross-curricular experience for their 8th grade students. And this is the second year this has been in effect. The challenge was for students to work in teams and choose a relevant issue to them and the City of Dublin that could be environmental or economic or social. They defined the issue, its relevance to them and the city, and then they created solutions to the problems that could be implemented as part of a new business development that was theoretically being built north of Eversole Run. This project was grant funded by the Dublin Education Foundation, and there were many community members and Jerome High School Debate Club students who met with these groups of students over the last month to provide expertise, feedback, and support. The culmination of this project took place last Friday, and it was a day-long event showcasing all the group's work, and that's in that large, long photo there. And then the top 11 teams competed in a Shark Tank style pitch-off with judges from our community, and they're going to announce their winners this Thursday at the 8th grade Moving Up ceremony. Special thanks to all of these community volunteers that were involved along the way. The lead teachers, Kelsey Urban and Allison Stafford, put in a lot of time to this project to organize it, and they said the collaboration of their 8th grade team was what made this possible. They were just so proud to be on that team. So it was a great way to keep all of their 8th graders engaged during the whole month of May. Finally, the last example I'd like to share, we had students from all of our high schools and Emerald campus who toured the new Mount Carmel Hospital construction site. And during this tour, students engaged with architecture, construction, and engineering professionals from Danis. They learned about the pathway options within those career clusters. And we had one of our team members, Lori Misi, spearheaded this along with Brandon Reese, who's our partner at Danis. With so many jobs becoming available in the construction industry and related industries in Central Ohio, these types of learning experiences will become more valuable than ever. These 3 examples of community-engaged learning demonstrate the dedication of our amazing teachers and to keep that learning happening every day, even late into May. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to future agenda items. The one thing I would say, knowing that the June meeting is going to be, not that they all aren't important, but it will be very important. The summer is often when we run into conflicts, so just making sure that we're all on the same page ahead of time with that, because it is going to be important for all 5 of us to be present whenever we have that detailed discussion.
And I will say, June 29th is extra important because we have our year-end fiscal approvals and stuff like that. So those are very important so we can get those. I know Tyson's still here, so otherwise he'd be panicking if we didn't have enough people to vote on those. So that's a very important meeting for our department at least.
So we'll make sure everybody gets a chance to look back at their calendars, just knowing what has occurred in the past, including myself. June tends to be a little bit crazy, so we'll all get on the same page for that. All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Melody. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. De Silva. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 5-0. We are adjourned.